Hello, friends. A very good morning, and so good to see you all on this beautiful Sunday morning. Um, from Isola, I welcome you all to our last session of this really wonderful series that we tried to bring to your homes and to you. We tried to explore all the various landscapes Maharashtra is so fortunate to have. We started with Nashik, and the concept or the main focus of that was more to do with mythology and many other historic layers of Nashik. Then we moved on to Aurangabad for its very abstract and a very different layerings other than just the historic. And last week we started our journey at Vidarbha and Nagpur. Today happens to be the day two of the session. Uh, a warm welcome again. Before we start the program, I would like to tell you a bit about our organization. We are ISOLA, which stands for Indian Society of Landscape Architects, and we happen to be the Maharashtra chapter. So we have such 9 chapters. We'll just go through a small video regarding same. It was started by Prabhakar Bhagwat sir. We are 9 chapters in total, and year round we have a schedule of events that we keep organizing. We're fortunate to have wonderful speakers coming in for various events. As a society and as a group of people, we are rich. We keep meeting throughout the year for various events and charting the future. There are a lot of student interactions as well. This pandemic has given us an opportunity to go online. So the recent 2 series in online. This is our team of Isola Maharashtra chapter. I welcome you all on behalf of the whole team. Yes, thank you for your patience. And I now hand over the platform to Sneha. Sneha, uh, all the best. And we are looking forward to the whole session ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. Hello, namaste, sat sri akal, and a very good morning to one and all. I, architect Sneha Mandekar, feel privileged to welcome everyone one more time on the series of Exploring Regional Landscapes. After the previous successful section, it's an honor to be back here on this platform. I believe you all are here with the same patience and enthusiasm. To brief about last session, we had a beautiful, precise introduction about Vidarbha region by architect Pradyumna Sahasrabudhe, where we saw how physical character, that is topography, geographical setup, has a prominent effect on the cultural landscape. Because of which, Vidarbha region is divided into two distinct ecosystems, that is grassland on the western part and which is also known as Darbaza Pradesh, and second Bhadipatti, the forest area lying on the eastern part of Vidarbha. He also talked on various tribes and its influence on the ecology of this region. He talked about then in second speaker as we had Kaustuv Pandari Pandey sir, who in depth spoke about grasslands, its importance and conservation through community-based eco restoration, which he has been doing past 20 years. He talked about his active work as a director on Samvedna project funded by UNDP with Pasipardi community, which is a traditional hunting tribe to conserve lesser florican species with the involvement of their traditional knowledge. Therefore, we can sum up session 1 by saying the most effective form of learning is practice, not just by planning. So continue today in session 2, we have Pradyumna sir for the second time with us and Prachi Mahorkar ma'am to share their stories and deepen our understanding about biogeography of Eastern Vidarbha and Nagpur city in particular from a landscape perspective. Therefore, I welcome you both and we really appreciate and are also obliged for the time you took out. About Pradyuman sir's brief introduction, he has contributed as an urban designer and an environmentalist handling temple, hill, and other conservation work for Vidarbha Heritage Society and state archaeology. He has been working in multidisciplinary fields and has professional experience of not more than 36 years. To introduce Prachima Urkar ma'am, who is our second speaker for the day. She is an ex-IT professional turned ecologist and enthusiastic, passionate nature lover. She has done a postgraduate course, year-long program in sustainable development of natural resources and nature conservation from Ecology Society Pune. After successfully completing this course, she started working on various restoration conservation related projects. She's into awareness raising for students, nature enthusiasts through providing interesting information by creating a suitable environment for developing a fresh perspective for looking at surrounding nature. She involves local people for the conservation of natural resources. She is also an organic grower and thus she is in the organizing committee of Seed Saver Group, which holds an event named Bijotsav every year in Nagpur. Through this event, the networking of farmers and consumers get established. She speaks and writes on various platforms for nature and farming related issues. She also started a consultancy firm along with Pradyumna sir called Punarma for ecological services and eco-design solutions in Nagpur. These firms provide consultancy for rejuvenation and restoration of various habitats, corridors, and helps in enhancing floral faunal diversity of the land, and also helps in eco-friendly construction methods. I welcome you, ma'am and sir. And now, without further ado, I would request sir to share your presentation.
Thank you, Sneha.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sneha. I will start my presentation. Last time we understood that Vidarbha region cannot be taken at one stroke in one presentation because it has two distinct parts. And what are the reasons for that and what are the repercussions of that? All of that we'll try to understand today. So biogeography of East Vidarbha uh, is dependent on very old phenomena called the uh, eruption of Deccan lava. I briefly spoke about it last time. The Indian plate broke away from Madagascar. You can see in one of the pictures over there. Then at one place it struck an island, a string of islands where the lava started erupting. That was about 65 million years back, and that caused extinction of the dinosaurs. So it was a very important event for us humans. Otherwise, we would not have been existing now. And then it went and struck the Eurasian plate. In the larger picture, which you can see, the Deccan traps, how the lava flowed. That you can see. Of course, it flowed into the sea as well, and then it flowed onto the subcontinent. But everywhere else, you will find the cratons, granite, greenstone terrain, and other very old type of rocks. And these old rocks were covered up by Deccan traps when it erupted. So in Bastar and Bhandara region, which is eastern Vidarbha, you will find a very different geology than what you can find in Deccan traps. So that is the basic reason why we have such different biogeographical features of the two regions. If you look at the uh, biogeographical profile and biodiversity corridors, you can see that the biogeographic classification of India shows three zones which are actually converging in East Vidarbha. One is of course 6B, which is part of Western Vidarbha also, which is the Central Plateau or Deccan Plateau. Then 6E is the Central Highlands. Central Highlands is basically the Vindhyas and the Satpura mountain ranges, which are folded mountains again created out of this pressure of lava or magma from underneath. It just raised the ground that much and made it to fold. It didn't erupt because the rocks were that much strong at that in that region. And 6C is the Eastern Plateau. Eastern Plateau is slightly hilly Chhattisgarh region, but essentially plain only, and extending right up to Orissa and Telangana, uh, or now Andhra Pradesh actually. So all these three regions converge near Nagpur, and so that's why actually Nagpur also has features of all these three regions in itself, in the city itself. If you superimpose the forest map of India onto the biogeographic zones, you will get this picture. You can see that forests are extending in the Himalayas, and of course all along the western boundary of the continent, which is the uh, uh, western and eastern edges of the subcontinent, and of course Satpuras and Vindhyas, and also in the plains area of Orissa and Gadchiroli, Chandrapur, and these regions. Uh, Prachi, will you want to come in and explain about these?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. We are talking about a bigger landscape right now on India scale. So we can see there are different types of forest in India itself. Like in Himalayas, we see coniferous forests. See, these are the broader terms I am using right now. There are also different types of forests, but just to speak about the Himalayas have coniferous forests, and the shore side we see mangrove forests and the moist deciduous or semi-evergreen kind of forest. And the major part you can see is lying at the central part of India, where mostly we can see the dry deciduous forest, moist deciduous forest, like that. And eastern side again, we see the very much greener patch, and that is also again comes under either mangrove towards this West Bengal, and coniferous forest at the northeast side of this India. So these are the major forest types we must have learned in our curriculum. But now, while coming back to our Vidarbha region, so as Pradyumna sir rightly mentioned, the eastern Vidarbha and western Vidarbha, the Darbha Pradesh, that is grassland, is clearly seen in this map, and the green patch is forested area, that is Zhadi Patti. We call it as Zhadi Patti here in Vidarbha. So the what you can say districts which falls under these Jharipatti area are Chandrapur, then Amravati, part of Nagpur, Wardha, some part of I mean Amravati, Bhandara, Gondia, and Yavatmal side, a little bit of Yavatmal. So these areas comes under this Jharipatti area. So these are the forests, in Vidarbha, eastern Vidarbha side also. There are again sub parts of, forest types we see usually. So we will discuss about it later. But this slide, I guess, Pradyumna sir is going to discuss.
yeah, sure. See, there are various tribes living in India since time immemorial. And this is a very unique thing about India, that the Adivasi tribes are you can say tribals of various types, actually number of types, because they live in forest, they live in mountains, they live in deserts. So different types of people are there. in grasslands you will find completely different type of people. But the largest tribal area in India was the Gond area, and this is roughly coinciding with the forested area, the central Indian forests of India. And why do we find such a large forest over here? Because the model of development which the Gond people or the tribal people had chosen was not to cultivate the land or not to make it free of forest and then develop it for either cultivation or some other kind of development like cities and industries and things like that. Even till now, actually they prefer to live in the jungles with the without cutting the trees. So that is why we have got such a large land over here. I will come back to this Gondwana after a little while. These are the various forest types found in Vidarbha. I think
Yeah.
Prachi will take over.
Yeah, yeah. So I was discussing about various forest types which we found in eastern parts of Vidarbha. So the most dominant type is this dry deciduous forest, southern tropical dry deciduous forest. So this is very common in our area, and these forests are mostly teak dominant forest, like we see in Tadoba. In summer, if you visit Tadoba jungle, you will find it completely dry. And the association of this teak forest is with Hardwickia vineta, like Hedu, we call it. Then some Lagostomia species, Bondara, and neem trees, palash trees, like that. There are some grassland and the sparse, vegetation found in this type of forest. And the rainfall is quite low, like 1000 mm till 1000 mm. We find in such areas we find this dry deciduous forest. In some regions we find this tropical moist deciduous forest. So it occurs mainly in higher rainfall areas like Gadchiroli. Gadchiroli is very dense, and it has a little bit more rainfall than this central part of Vidarbha. And then Chandrapur region and Gondia district. So there we find the moist deciduous forest. Here again we see the some part of grasslands and more thick vegetation. Again there are teak forests and the Monosperma, Butea monosperma, like palash trees, neem trees. But along with that we find some terminalia trees, jamun trees, mahua. So like that, the associations get varies along with the rainfall and elevation. Then there are riparian forests. We have some major rivers flowing through this region. The Wainganga and the other Kanhan river and Nadi. Even in this aquatic vegetation is found in Gondi and Gadchiroli area, Sipna river. So riparian vegetation is very much important and plays a very crucial role in this area, because these areas again acts as corridors for wildlife. And the vegetation is like Arjuna trees, then jamun trees, salix, tetrasperma, that is Varun's trees. So some sages, grasses. So these things mainly found on the banks of along the banks of rivers, and these are the sponge of the excess water. So these areas also can be seen in eastern parts of Vidarbha, also at the banks of Khobragadi river and Wainganga river, as I mentioned earlier. There are some mountain or hill forests in Meghat and Gadchiroli hills. Meghat is a lush green, area, forested area. Again, it is a teak dominant area which was introduced. It was there, but it was conserved by Britishers because they at that time they looked at forest as or a tree as a timber source. So they propagated this teak thing. They conserved this teak trees, and now the law is we are following the same laws, and we are protecting teak dominant areas. So, but on hill forest or the mountain forest, these are playing a major role in that kind of forest because these are all high risk areas. The development of forest on such areas is very tricky. It requires thousands of years. So these are very precious kind of forests which are still remaining in these areas. And the tropical evergreen forest, this is a very unique term. You might have never heard about this term, tropical dry evergreen forest. Although it's a dry region, it has not much rainfall, but year long you will see a green patch in that particular area, consisting mahua trees, some mango trees, then kind of bamboo. So these things we find in this dry evergreen forest patch. And there are some scrub forest. In Buldhana region, we find the scrub forest, or in grassland area, we find scrub forest, mostly acacia species, palash, neem kind of things. Then caparis species we find in the scrub forest. And as I mentioned, aquatic vegetation in Gondia and Gadchiroli, where wetlands are still there. I mean, in Bhandara and Gondia, these districts are lake districts. There are lots of lakes, man-made lakes, natural lakes found in this region, and the aquatic vegetation is still very good. Like wild rice varieties we find in these areas, in these districts, Gondia, Gadchiroli, and Bhandara district. So as I mentioned, the dry forest, how it looks. This is a moist forest. The photo is from Pench National Park. Pench National Park is altogether different from Tadoba. These are the riparian vegetation we find, and this is a photo from Kolkas, Melghat, and this is the Sipna River. So the vegetation we can see over there. This is a typical hill mountain forest. This photo is taken in Pachmadi, but similar things we found in Gadchiroli area. We can see the various color shades and various tree types in this particular patch. These are what you can say. If you disturb this thing, it will get destroyed in a very. It will get destroyed in very less time. Yeah. So this is savanna grassland kind of thing. This photo is taken from Karanja Sohar Grassland Sanctuary. Scrub forest also looks the same. The vegetation is very sparse and no thicker canopy, very less canopy we can see over here. And as I mentioned, different tiger corridors and the forest names I mentioned, like Pench or Tadoba and Melghat and Gadchiroli and all those things. So you can see in this map, these forests are connected with some fragmented or continuous corridors. So these forests are connected, and the wildlife needs to move from one place to another. So and in between some cities, that there are some settlements and linear development like roads and railway tracks we find, and this disturbs the movement of, this restrict the movements of wildlife. But still we can see in this region some good corridors which are connecting this forest to each other. So this is the area, and we can see the fragmented green patches. See, the Melghat region is connected to Boar Tiger Reserve, which is again connected to Katepurna Tiger Reserve, Gyan Ganga Wildlife Sanctuary, or Karandla Wildlife Sanctuary. So these green patches, mostly it's still there because of the rivers. Rivers plays a major role in this corridor thing. The vegetation along the banks of these rivers, it acts as wildlife corridors. Or sometimes the patches are still there. The wildlife which roam from one region to another, they use these corridors.
Yeah, we'll come back to that thing which I was speaking about Gondwana. As you can see, Vidarbha is partly onto this uh, Vidarbha or Darbha Pradesh, and then of course partly in the Jharipatti area. There is a very important social and political thing which is associated with the Gondwana, other than being the forest area. When the British found that right in the center of the country and away from the other so-called developed areas of the country, there were people living in a large forested area uh, who were which were tribes actually. So the British needed a narrative to rule to continue their colonial rule, and they always thought that they had to somehow justify it, then not just rule it with a iron fist, but they wanted to believe themselves that they are doing a good thing when they are ruling India. So they created a narrative out of this. They they actually connected these forests, the very old rocks, which are among the oldest in the world, and these old tribes. They concocted a story out of that, and then they said that these people they are still tribals. They are not influenced by the Hindu religion. They are waiting for the Christian missionaries to come and to teach them how to live. That was one of the things which they started, and then they connected it to primitivism. All these forests and the people, they connected it to primitivism, and to such an extent, and that they made such a hullabaloo about that, that the Austrian scientist who was actually working on a different theme that was connected into the southern and the northern continents. The southern continent he named as Gondwana land. The entire southern continent, which was comprising at that time of Antarctica, Australia, India, South America, Africa, all that was the southern continent, and the northern continent was the Laurasia, the northern Europe and Asia. That was Laurasia. So he called it Gondwana land because the belief was that the southern parts of the globe are primitive, and they need to be brought up by Christian missionaries by going there. And the other thing which was very important for this Gondwana region was that, as I told you, geologically it was a different region. Most of minerals of Maharashtra come from this region. 95% of the minerals, and of course there are other regions like Bastar and Orissa, and all these places are now, as you know, are full of iron ore mines, dolomite mines, and of course coal. Today we know that we are fighting. Many countries are fighting over oil. At that time, oil was unknown. The existence of oil was not there. The only thing which was powering this empire of British was coal, and coal was so important. Therefore, they needed an excuse to extract it also. And who would extract it? They created a myth that since the Gonds are so close to the earth, they have actually come up from the earth. They believe that they have come up from the earth. They have no problem in going into the mines and going deep into the earth's crust and mining the coal from there. So these kinds of stories are related to the geography of the of Gondwana region. Uh, Coming back to the city of Nagpur, because now we'll have a look at the city, which is on the right, sitting right on the edge of the two regions. One is the, of course, the Deccan Trap, the other is the other geological type. The bluish patch which you can see in the center is the Nagpur city, and the reddish patches are all green areas. They are all actually biodiversity corridors about which Prachi was talking about. So from this satellite image, we can extract number of information, lot of information, like this geomorphological map. We can see that over here is the Nagpur city, and then the gray area literally is the basalt region where the lava flow had come, and the pink and the brownish orange areas are the other geological types which contain lot of rich minerals. As you can see, the slope of the entire thing is towards the east. Over here, some rivers have come down from the north. The one which is coming from the north is Pench River. Then there is Kanhan River, which is the most prominent river which you can see in this. Then there is Kolar River. Then of course there are very small streams which you can see, you can trace them out. These are Pili River, Nag River, Pora River, Dhora River. All these streams, as you can see more or less, are actually originating from Nagpur city, because Nagpur is also sitting at a ridge-like situation. We can see that all these rivers are flowing in a particular direction, and only this Vena river is flowing to the south because it falls on the other side of the ridge. And if you actually earmark the watershed map, actually we are earmarking the ridges here and calling them WGKN, which means Wainganga Kanhan Basin 1, Wainganga Kanhan Basin 2, and W means Wardha Vena 6, Wardha Vena 5, and so on. So these kind of things can be done at micro level also. This kind of watersheds can be marked at micro level if you want to do any kind of landscaping. This is what we do when we are working in a very small area also, because otherwise it's very difficult to really manage the watershed. From all of this you get of course the land use. Now entire yellow area, as you can see, even though we had seen that it was full of greenery, natural forest area also, but all of yellow area is cultivated area in the hands of people. All the green areas are basically with the forest department, and all the pink areas are scrub forest or Jhudpi jungle or things like that. And of course in the center you can see the Nagpur city. If you look at Nagpur city and consider the landscape features of that and how the city developed out of that, you can see that the old city was on one side, and then the middle or buffer area was a different area altogether, and then the civil lines area of the city, and the area with which Nagpurians like us, most of us, are more aware is the West Nagpur area, which is the newly developed area of the city. The landscape features which the British used for developing this West Nagpur were the Sitabardi Hill, the Seminary Hill, the Futala Tank, the LIT Hill, the Starkey Point Hillock, and so these British, they had these boundaries earmarked for the civil lines area, so that they have a very particular area to themselves, and which is comparatively safe and difficult to approach from other sides. And from the south side they actually developed the new native city, but within the new native city and the civil lines also they wanted a lot of buffer area. So they left a lot of buffer fields, which are now called Panjabrao Krishi Vidyapit fields, or at that time it was called Victoria Technical Institute fields. These are all experimental farms, and these experimental farms also provided a buffer. If somebody wanted to come in from that side, you could see from a distance that somebody is coming in, and no structures can be built in that area. So all these features which you can see, Seminary Hill, all these water tanks, the rivers, the open fields, all of these are part of city's heritage now. All of these are actually listed heritage. So this is how the landscape was used for developing Nagpur city. And as far as old city is concerned, it it also has had landscape features which were very prominent and which were used for developing it. The city started developing the old city on the bank of Jumma tank. The Jumma tank was developed by the Gond people actually, and you can see a small gadi like structure over here, which was the Gond Killa, right? It was actually a forest outpost for the Gonds. They were ruling from Devgarh, not they were not ruling from here. They came here quite late, around 1702 or so, but they have been ruling since 1600 or even before that from the hills of Pachmadi and Devgarh and those areas. Gadha, Mandla, Chanda, all these hills were occupied by them. They came into the plains in about 1702. And soon after that, actually the uh, uh, entire dominion of the Gonds passed on to the Marathas, to the Bhosles of Nagpur, which is a completely different historical story. So sometime else we can go into that. But uh, landscape wise, you can see a few things. You can see that the city was built downside of the Jumma tank. Because of the Jumma tank, there was a lot of groundwater which was available in the old city. All the slopes actually led towards this Jumma tank and the city. So and towards the river, which you can see in the south. So this was a very water-rich area as far as groundwater is concerned, and still now, till now also, you can actually dig a well there and take your water out easily. So that was the reason why it was located there. Then the Jumma tank was there, and rest of the areas was forest. But when the British came, they actually established themselves in this residency compound first. They won one battle in 1803 against the Bhoslas, and then established this residency to keep control over the affairs, Nagpur affairs. So they won this battle. This Sitabardi battle was, of course, locally it was important, but not just locally. This was one of the most major uh, victories, although won quite easily for the British, because from here they controlled entire central India, the central provinces, Berar, and all those areas, and uh, all the resources in this area. So what they did was that they built one museum here in 1864. So it was in 1864, there was nobody actually to come and look at that museum, at least not from the local population, not from the native population. But the purpose of the museum was that all the samples of resources which were available in this area, timber samples, mineral samples, uh, and of course some archaeological findings and uh, samples of birds and for flora and fauna, all of that was kept in this museum. And people came and to see this because, for example, Jamshedji Tata came here in 1874. So that's a different story, which is again related to the landscape which we are seeing just now. In the area in between Jumma, alongside Jumma tank, in between the old fortified city and the Sitabardi hill, there was blank area. The natives didn't want to go, they were afraid to go to the side of the British. The British were afraid to go and stay on the native side. So this became kind of buffer area in between the two settlements. So Jamshedji Tata had come to look at iron ore over there. He had actually he visited uh, the Ajab Bangla, as we call it, the central museum established by the British. He found one very rich iron ore source over there. He wanted to first start his steel mill near Nagpur or in Madhya Pradesh. So he found that iron ore. That iron ore was from Jabalpur. So he went there, but in Jabalpur he couldn't start his mill because the hill which was containing that iron ore, some Baba was controlling over there. And people used to believe in that Baba. So they didn't allow Jamshedji Tata to start that mill by extracting iron ore from there. But when he had come to Nagpur railway station, which was somewhere very near to the Sitamarhi Hill. Again, they started everything around the Sitamarhi Hill, the British. So when they did that, uh, he saw that this area is remaining fallow. There is a water body which is very close. Then there are cotton bales over there which had come from the train, or which were to be actually uploaded into the train. And he understood that if he can occupy this area and start his mill here, he will save a lot of money, because he won't have to carry the bales right up to Mumbai or wherever, and then he will get water from this tank. And the land, the British offered him the land very cheaply. So he started his first textile mill here, and the entire central area of Nagpur became like a kind of industrial area, which still is like that. And you can see some dotted lines over here through the Jumma tank. He actually claimed ownership of entire area on west side of the that he put a bund over here. And on the presently the tank has been reduced to a very small water, much smaller water body than what it was earlier. So all these things happen with so-called development. So we also have to understand that it's a phenomenon which started in 1870s, that thing, development. So this is how the landscape, actually the overall landscape of the city influence the development of the areas in the city. You can also see a larger picture. You have already seen the details of the old city and the Jumma tank and that, and civil lines area was subsequently developed by the British. But even at that time, there are a number of settlements around Nagpur, and the little darker orange red patches which you can see were all encampments or chhawni areas of the Bhosles. So all the water bodies which the Bhosles developed around the city, not Jumma tank, but the rest of the water bodies which the Bhosles developed were all actually army encampment areas, because the army encampment also required water bodies to sustain them. So that kind of landscape features are also there, and which are without that kind of landscape possibilities, the development would not have taken place. But nowadays, of course, we don't need to pay any attention to all these things. So we can have all the mindless unauthorized or authorized layouts without any consideration for any of the natural features nowadays. Everything comes in between. You can just break it, or you can block it, or you can do what you like with it. But earlier that was not the case. That is something which we need to learn when we do town planning, and of course landscaping of the city also. If you look at the Nag River, this is a very important thing which is the most important landscape feature of Nagpur, and therefore I am dwelling on it a little bit more. See, the origin of the river is within the city, more or less within the city. Only about 4-5 kilometers away, there is one place called Lava, which is almost a part of Nagpur city now. The Basti extends right up to there, and from there the Nag River originates, and then there is a bund over here. By creating a dam there, the Ambazari tank has been created, and most people believe that the Nag River originates from the Ambazari. Of course, no river can originate from a small tank like that. It originates somewhere, and then it is of course dammed. And then there is another dam which was built by the Gore people, which was called Gorewada, which was for supplying water to the civil lines area. That was another landscape feature. So this slide shows all the how the people use the landscape features along Nag River itself, all along Nag River, how they were using, some ghats were built, some temples were built, and some orchards were there, and some other gardens, royal gardens were there. And of course, the British also created this Victoria Terminal, Victoria Technical Institute, buffer fields for themselves. So the river plays a very important uh, part in development of the city to a very large extent, till about 100 years back. And later on, of course, things changed completely. Now nobody even knows whether the river is there or not. Nobody bothers actually. So that is the situation, and we need to look at it from that perspective. This was how it was in 1908, the Sangameshwar, and now it is all, the Sangameshwar remains there, but the water which is flowing is all sewage, and there is no water of Nag river as such flowing in this river now. There are two streams, as you can see. One is the Futala stream or the Bor stream, and the other is Nag river. And you can see that 100 years back the Maweshis could take the cattle up to the river and for drinking water and all that. Now, of course, that is unthinkable. There are, of course, other landscape features in Nagpur. As I told you, there were water tanks. The first two tanks, Gorewada tank and Ambadri tank, were for supplying water to the people. Gorewada tank, as you can see on the left hand side, it's a very modern kind of dam with a lifting gate and all that. Gorewada was built by the Gore people, and the water was taken to the Seminary Hill. It was actually treated and then taken to the Seminary Hill, and from there it was supplied to the civil lines area exclusively. And from Ambazari tank, water was untreated, water was supplied to rest of the people, and it flowed by gravity because the slope of the city permitted that. And Nag river, even now you can see glimpses of Nag river as it would have been at that time. In some areas it has not been canalized. Water, of course, is sewage, but you can see how beautiful it still looks in the center. And there were other tanks, the Telankhedi tank, the Pardi tank, then the Sakkardara tank, Sonegao tank, Pandrabudi tank. Tanks were basically army encampment areas, which were had so many other features like Pushkarani. Pushkarani is a swimming tank with a stepped entrance possibly. And of course, Jumma tank you can see in the right hand corner. You can see the Sitabardi hill in the background, and you can see the Empress Mill chimneys over there. And the embankment which is you can see is only half of the tank which we could see in the map, of which you could, rest of it is all of course converted into some or the other use. And then there are hills. All of these are included in our heritage list, and they play an important part in development of the city itself. Since coming in of the heritage regulations, some of the hills have got some protection, but still, and some of them are getting built over still. So that is the situation. And as I talked to you, some of the historical gardens were associated with the army encampments as well, because this was a recreational kind of army encampment where important guests were put up. So Telankhedi Pushkarani and Telankhedi Garden was one such area. Then Sonegao Pushkarani was a purely army encampment. Maharaj Bagh, as the name suggests, was a kind of zoo created by the Maharaj. I think I will let Prachi to take over from here.
Now we will look at the current urban scenario which we have observed during our tree census thing, which we carried out in Nagpur, which is still we are carrying on. The urban people are very much keen to cut the trees. They just want to clear their backyards, their angan thing. They just don't want this leaf litter and all. The planners or the landscape or the PWD, the urban people, they just want the surrounded by humans only. So, and the development approach is also very much human centric. Like the ornamental trees are introduced by all the departments or the experts, so-called experts, and only those things now seen in urban settlements. Concretization is a bigger problem nowadays. Because of concretization, we don't see any land available for the plantation. And it is not functionality and utility based. That's a very major issue nowadays we see. Earlier we have seen that our backyards were used to be there used to be a functional gardens, like we have medicinal varieties, we were having food crops, like we used to grow banana or curry leaf, or lemongrass, something like that, which we consume. So these were earlier there. Now we see that the things are very much landscaped, or which it looks good, and there is no consideration for the utility thing of these gardens. So we just water the plants and we just expect it to look really beautiful. We don't want to consume anything from our garden nowadays. So the ornamental species introduction that we have already seen. The major problem with this the introduced species, the exotic species which are introduced in our gardens, the issue of these introduced species are most of the times it gets escaped from our gardens. The species like this Cassia samia, so these species we found very much, the wild growth of this species is found in various vacant spaces. It has gregarious fruiting, and the seeds get dispersed in the vacant land, and then we see the growth of these species. The cosmos, this photo is taken somewhere in Western Ghat, where the same scenario is seen in Vidarbha region as well. Yesterday only I was moving towards Wardha side, and I've seen lots of wild patches over there of cosmos. It is a very beautiful, it has the flowering is really beautiful, and it was introduced by some of the trekkers and some gardeners, and now it got escaped in wild, and now you can see it is giving setback to our local flora. Once we examined a 1 square meter patch in wild, and we found that there were 40 different species were present in that particular 1 square meter patch. And there were grasses and herbs, shrubs, some climbers. So all were present in just a 1 square meter patch. But if you see any such exotic species which is very much invasive, so it gives setback to the local flora, and ultimately gives setback to the fauna, which is directly depending on the local flora, for nectar or for food, or if they are eating the fruits of these wild species and all. This Subabur, so this is again introduced species to just convert the barren patches in green cover for a fodder thing. But nowadays we have seen that the spread of the species so in a very rapid rate. So to control the spread, the eradication programs need to be taken nowadays. It is found that this is a toxic species. The toxicity found in these leaves, although it is still using as fodder by the goat keepers and the cattle keepers, but it's very invasive and dominant species. The lantana camera, we must have heard about it. It is now dominated in all the forested patches. It is giving setback to to local flora, and the species like tiger is also very much struggling with this plant species, because their prey is taking shelter in these plants. It is a kind of thorny plant, and once a wild boar or some other prey get shelter in this the thicket, it is very difficult to get a prey for tiger as well. And it is again giving the setback, and it is very much invasive species. So even Forest Department is taking the eradication program of lantana. We call it as Ghaneri or Tantani. This is Ipomia Beshram, we call it as. It is found near the wetland thing or the shore of lakes or rivers. It is again widely spread. It was introduced by some gardener or landscape architect, I don't know, but it was introduced species, and now it is got escaped from our gardens, and it is widespread everywhere near the vacant spaces near the wetlands. This thing, water hyacinth, we must have heard about its story that someone from some Dutch from some other country, they gifted it to the Prince of Wales, and he kept it at Kolkata, and within few years the whole water bodies was covered with this water hyacinth. And although it has some properties of taking the hard metals from water, but it covers the whole water body and doesn't allow oxygen to get dissolved in water. So the fauna inside the water, and the aquatic fauna, it gets less and less oxygen, and ultimately they die. So this is a very invasive and very problematic species, which is widely now seen in all our rivers and lakes. This is Zinnia. Like Cosmos, the Zinnia is very much spread in all, the near the human settlements or along the farm boundaries, alongside the roads. I'm happily eradicating the Zinnia from my farm. So these are the Zinnia flowers. Gliricidia, which was introduced again by Social Forestry and Forest Department, and it is seen very much on various hills where they were looking for quick green cover. Now this species so much invasive, and there is no growth found under these trees, because its flowers are sticky and it doesn't allow anything to grow under its canopy. So the only dominant species we can see, if we plant this species at any barren place or any vacant place, its species it spreads like anything, and it gives setbacks to other local flora. These are we know about it, Gulmohar. So this species is not invasive as such, but it doesn't give any ecological benefit to the local fauna, like insects or birds. You will never see any bird nesting on these trees. So if our local fauna is not accepting this species, so we must avoid this species as well. So what we find in Nagpur while doing our tree census, so these are the findings. Around 200 species are found in our city. In this in this city, we found around 200 species, out of which as many as 40 species are exotic. 40%. I mean, I am talking about species, not a count, not a number, but the species wise, 40% species are exotic, which are not at all related to any nearby jungle. As Pradyumna sir mentioned that Nagpur is at a reach, and where all the wildlife corridors are passing, and various forest types are present at its boundary itself. But inside the city, around 40% species are not at all related to any nearby natural forest. And plantation versus natural ratio is 80-20. I mean, the plantation is there, like the avenue plantation or inside the parks, and some remnants are there. So these are the 20% naturally grown native species, but 80% are plantation thing, which we have seen. Native versus exotic ratio is 30-70. If there are some palash or a mango or jamun trees, I can see. At the same time, I can see more exotic species which are planted by various departments or by local people for just ornamental purpose, for the just beautification purpose, like Gulmohar or Spathodia, or Bahunia, Saptaparni kind of those species we found mostly rather than our native species. Around 10% of all the species are planted repeatedly without considering ecological harm. That is Ashoka, Cassia species, Dillonyx, Lake Gulmohar, rain tree, Peltophorum, Akash neem, Frangipani, the Chafa we call it as in Marathi. Palm species like royal palm, bottle palm, Chinese fan palm, all those things, Gliricidia, eucalyptus, and Vilaticins, that means monkey pod. Those species we found in our survey. So these species we found repeatedly. I mean, if we are surveying a particular grid, so out of 1,000 species, we can see around 700 species are of these species, of these plants only, these types only. City developers consider tree as headache, and they look at us as if we are the ones who gives permission for their tree cutting. So they just told us that the leaf litter is a headache and this is which is undesirable. And the tree hides the display of their property, their beautiful homes, or the hoardings of a shop. So they just don't want anything in front of their wall. Trees give shelter to insects, birds, and bats. So according to them, it's again a headache. I mean, birds shits, bats threatens at the night time. So they want to chop it down. The tree should be planted for summer purpose, but it should be planted by neighbors. What we call in Marathi, Shivaji Janmava Dusracha Ghari kind of thing. So they just don't want to take responsibility of any tree plantation. Tree authorities and tree lovers have only one role, that is to permit tree cutting when asked for. When we visit their property and we just ask their permission to note down the tree species and other details, the first thing they ask us whether they are allowed to cut this tree. So these are our observations from tree census. So what we suggest, somebody asked on the chat box, are there any solutions? So yes, definitely there is a solution. Up till now we have looked at a very bigger scale, starting from the scale from India level, then to move back to Vidarbha, that to Eastern Vidarbha. We have seen various forest types, the different types of vegetations, its association with other trees, like if we have dry, tropical dry deciduous forest, so the teak plants have association with some anjan trees, that is Hardwickia binata and all those trees. So considering that, we should go for a detailed survey report, which must be already available with Forest Department or any NGO, with any other NGO. So accordingly, we can plan a smaller area. If we are working at a Meghat site, so we should consider the forest which is nearby, and the forest type, the species available over there, and we can replicate it in our site. So it could be a 1 acre site or 50 acre site. It could be anything. You can, if you cannot physically give a wildlife corridor, but you can introduce a canopy corridor for different other species like flying squirrel or some types of hornbills. They require, they doesn't take, you must have noticed that they doesn't go for longer flights. They just require intermittent trees. They just glide and settle on a particular tree. So for them, we can introduce a canopy corridor. But first of all, we need to study the nearby jungle and the species present over there, and we can replicate it at our site. This is the picture we are seeing right now is from one of our site, and there you can see the footprint of the human activities is very less, and the most of the area which is coming under the vegetation part. Either it could be a grassland, a butterfly park, or a sacred grove kind of thing. But plantation should be according to the survey. I mean, if there are some already difficult areas where plantation, where trees are already present, we can keep it as it is. Because it is already grown, it has reached its certain level, so we cannot clear those things and then again introduce some other thing, although it may be a a native plant. But if it is already there, we just strengthen the existing thing and plan accordingly. If there is a stream flowing from our side, then considering it as a watershed, and then we have to develop, we can introduce a riparian zone trees along the bank of that stream, and then plan the other areas. So here in this site, you can see we have taken very much efforts to plant different trees or to develop a canopy corridor. At the bottom, you can see a butterfly park where the butterfly loving trees are introduced, and that too native. You know, there are some exotic species which butterfly prefer for as a food plant or just to roost, but we can easily avoid those things. We have a various range of native trees which are attractive and which are very much loved by our native fauna. Some bamboo setum is also introduced in this site. So the local bamboo cities. This site was at a buffer area of Pench National Park. So we just replicated the microcosm of Pench in this small 15 acres of patch. Execution. The part of execution is already done here, and because of the other things, the rest of the things are in pending state, but it is like this only. Yeah, so these are the bamboo species. It is mentioned over there if it is visible to you, readable to you. All these species are found in Pench National Park. So we introduced those native bamboo species in this bamboo setum, and the pathways were designed accordingly. The herbs, shrubs, and climbers, and some capillary species were introduced in that. Even an organic farm for their daily needs, we developed over there. We proposed there, and it was in a mosaic pattern. It should be a good looking, as well as considering all 12-month cycle. Because some of the vegetables come in Rabi season, that is in this winter season, some are in rainy season. So considering that and some perennial things, so accordingly we developed this patch.
We are moving towards conclusion, but what we have seen is that we learn a few things from our past, from the traditions, and we see that a lot of things are happening presently. The current scenario is not so good because and we all know that for our civilization is about 5,000-7,000 years old, whatever we want to believe. But in last 50-70 years, actually, we have come to a very serious crisis situation. We are talking about extinction and things like that. And why has that happened? Because we have completely given a go by to conservative traditional practices, sustainable practices, and we must actually learn all these things from these studies. For example, I am showing here a picture of Jodhpur city. The circular part was the old Jodhpur city. As you can see, there are very narrow gullies there, and it's a very compact kind of city. And the new Jodhpur, as you can see, they are all gridiron kind of streets, lots of streets, and lot of space is given lost in that. And not just a lot of spaces lost in the uniformly wide streets, but also around each structure some spaces to be left out, like in all plotted development, and only about 1/3 you can build and 2/3 you have to leave out. And it's the opposite, or even more densely packed houses, as you can see in the image in the center. the entire light, ventilation, etc. is drawn from the courtyards, and that is the most suitable for our climate. But we are not just considering our climate while doing our town planning. We are just considering some kind of foreign ideas, Western ideas when we do our town planning. And the purpose of town planning is not for conservation, not for creating any ecosystem, not for sustainability. It's just to create some authority kind of situation and give arbitrary rulings and permissions. For example, you can have FSIF 1, and then after a file you can say that you can have FSIF 2, which means that the FSIF 1 or FSIF 2 really means nothing except that they want to control the people through those rules. So rather than giving any thought to whatever we are doing things very arbitrarily. And the same, and in our colleges also, in architectural or landscape or whatever colleges we learn, these kind of approaches are not taken. So therefore the same kind of situation continues uh, in the offices, in the authorities, and in the next generations of students also. So this is where we actually need to come in and actually intervene and try to do something which is more sustainable. All our land has to be saved, energy has to be saved, toxic construction materials like cement and steel have to be reduced, and if we don't change the way we do our town planning, it is not possible to do so. In the old times it could be done because a 3000 square foot plot meant that you could build a haveli over there, and now a 3000 square foot plot means we can build only about 1000 square foot structure where all the rooms are very small, and people prefer to encroach a little bit here and there. So that is the way we are doing things now. So we have to look at all these things very critically. I think I will hand it back over to.
Yeah. So I can see there are many questions like how to conserve them, how to find native species which are related to Nagpur city only. We should believe in nature. You know, nature is the greatest creator and it can survive, it can thrive, but we just need to give some space and time for it to be, survive. Our intervention should be very minimal. There is a term called benign neglect. So we cannot completely neglect its power, but we can nurture it. Um, there are some patches which are still there inside the city, which can be taken care of. If you can show us the slide number 17 or next slide, we can. Yeah. Yeah. So enhancement of Nagpur cities. Yeah.
You want me to go back to that slide 17? I can go do that.
Yeah. After that, after this slide.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So enhancement of potential corridors, rivers, hills, heat chains. So as you must have seen from Pradyumna's slides, that there are some hills still present in our city, like Seminary Hills, and the other patches, Mahadevgarh ranges, and there are some tanks like Gorewada tank, Futara tank, Ambazari tank. These are the lakes, bigger lakes. So there are some wild patches over there. If you can go to slide number 17, there they can easily relate what I'm talking to them. So here you can see the green patches are still present. This is Gorewada tank and this is Ambazari. In the main, in between there is the Futara tank. Am I audible?
Yes. Very good.
Okay. So here, if you want to plant anything, a social plantation thing, if you are going to do, so just find suitable places. These tanks are were already connected through some wild patches, through Seminary Hills and all. So we can still connect those things. Although it is divided, disturbed by some roads, but still we can develop a canopy corridor over here. We can strengthen our rivers and canals. If you must have gone to Maharaj Bagh area, the canal which is passing through this Maharaj Bagh, you can see a very good green vegetation and the diverse vegetation over there. If you can see the Shankarnagar or Ramdaspet area, the canals, this vegetation is still so promising, and the potentiality are really very high in that particular area. So just roam the city, just find some suitable places, and then take particular action. We can develop roads as canopy corridors. We must have seen that through these campaigns, the 33 crore tree plantation and all. We have planted as many trees as possible and wherever it is possible. So while planting those trees, we can consider road as canopy corridors. We still need lots of shade in our Nagpur city. Ours is a very hot region. So while planting trees, we should consider about these things. We cannot go for this Ashoka plantation or the Acacia siamia plantation, because they don't have the larger canopies. They don't have a bigger green cover. So if we go for our native bigger plants like acacia, bubble trees, or neem trees, or dhawda or karam, that is Mitragynna parvifolia. So those things, if we can consider plant again, so we will get better results in our city itself. Plantation of native plants, I am talking about it repeatedly. At this point again, we have discussed in detail the functional versus landscape ornamental gardens. So apart from this, the plantation drives or road plantations, if you are going to plant anything in your garden, so just go for a native fruit bearing tree or medicinal tree, like just nimbu or kadi patta or this panputi, which butterflies likes very much, or mangoes are lots of there in our area, but tendu. So the fruits are very much edible, and we can introduce this forest species in our garden as well. So we will get the purpose will get solved, like shade, the fruits, and ecological purpose will get solved if we plant our gardens with native and functional species. We can grow some fruit plants, I mean food plants like brinjal, tomatoes. So that thing also is very much doable in our gardens, because nowadays urbanites are very much dependent on outer sources. I mean, for fresh air they are dependent on nearby villages or jungles. For fresh air, the fresh water, the clean water, they are again dependent on nearby jungles and the rivers which are flowing from Adivasi areas. So we are stealing their air, their water, their food, but at the end we are giving, what we are giving back is pollutants. So we can take some of the responsibility, we can grow some of our food, we can grow our native plants, and we can help in enhancing our ecosystem, urban ecosystem. Planning of a project considering land as the most valuable natural resource, which Pradyumna has rightly mentioned, that it's the only resource which is available. We cannot create land again and again. The water is recyclable. Again, every year we are getting fresh water through rain. The air is recyclable through trees. But land, if it is gone, it is gone. So we have to consider this resource very critically. This was the question, the commonly seen exotic trees. So in all of the towns, cities, bigger cities, we see that these are the species very much available, very much planted in all the areas, like eucalyptus gliricidia, sobabu, rain tree, pink acacia, false almond, that is badam we call it, and this is not a badam at all. The fruits are very much similar to badam tree, so we call it as badam. Australian acacia, even cannonball, casuarina, kanchan, silver oak, spathodia. So these are the species, tabubia for that matter. So this particular 25-30 species we can see in our urban areas or in plantation. But apart from that, these are the 20 commonly seen native species. Although it is native, but it is repetitively used in plantation. So in central India, there are around 250, more than 250 native species are found of bigger trees. Not herbs and shrubs I'm talking about. The big trees are more than 250 species are there. So why we are restricted ourselves to just 20 species or 25 species? We can go beyond that. In that way, we will attract more beautiful birds, more butterflies in our garden, in our city, and we will be richer in ecological way as well. So think about it, and if you are interested to know what are the species are present in our central part of India, so there are some field guides. The one field guide is Jungle Trees of Central India by Pradeep Krishan. The other beautiful field guide is Trees of Vidarbha by Govekar, published by Forest Department itself. So just go for these books and you will find the native species list very much handy through these field guides.
I would like to sum up finally. We saw we started from a very kind of peninsular, if not a global perspective, and then ended by looking at the trees we should plant and we should not plant. But when you look at a city, two things actually which we stressed throughout, and from a global perspective to the local. One is that your city is in a geographical setting. So when you want to expand it, when you want to convert into a metro region, and when you want to plan it, you must allow the biodiversity corridors to pass through and enhance those biodiversity corridors. That is one thing which we saw today. And the other thing was that the city town planning never allows or never really plans for any kind of ecosystem development. The other non-pollutive, things which can control pollution and all that, the town plans never allow for that, or at least they were do it in a very conscious or in a planned manner. So the city must have its own ecosystem, and that should find a place in the development plan of the city. So if these two things are done, creating an ecosystem in the city and allowing the biodiversity corridors to be created, protected and passed through the city itself, we should focus on this from a landscape perspective.
Thank you so much, ma'am and sir, for broadening our perception and sensitivity about this region and delivering such a remarkably outstanding presentation that I'm really finding it difficult in getting the right words to express my gratitude to both of you. Your years of research, your depth of understanding of user interfaces, and your ability to present the subject in such an interesting way produce one of the most wonderful ways. To be honest, it's just an impossible task to cover this region in mere 2 sessions. But both of you really have taken effort to justify it. This version of Western Vidarbha and Nagpur city is fascinating and educational. I'm sure audience must have been definitely intrigued and looking forward to implement it. Thank you for helping us become more aware of the problems and the ways we can help and participate in solving them. Also, while making it a smart city, how we as a landscape architect can sustain the natural ecosystem of Nagpur and its surroundings has been conveyed brilliantly. So to conclude, I would share a small quote by Hilmar Dessen that trees are symbols of immobility. They prove that power is not defined by movement. So with this, and moving on to the question answer session, I would request Shruti ma'am to take over the platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sneha. And let's quickly move on to our question answer session. Other than a lot of chats of appreciation about the session, there are few really good questions that have come up. Let's go one by one. Mr. Abhimanyu?
Well, actually, my question was answered by ma'am during the session.
Okay, great. Good to have you, Abhimanyu. Next question was from Sonal Bhatt. Sonal Bhatt, ma'am, if you are around, can you unmute yourself? You have many questions that you have raised. I'll read few of them. Are there any awareness sessions being conducted by the state government or Isola Maharashtra chapter to change an attitude of people towards trees? Because in absence of responsibility taken by netizens, the efforts of the government agencies or caretakers of environment are futile. Very true. Isola Maharashtra chapter, from our end, we do try to conduct awareness sessions, but we have yet to reach to the netizens, the citizens of our cities and other parts. We will certainly want to do that. The first part, Prachi ma'am, do you want to answer? Are there any awareness programs being done?
Not by us, actually. We speak on various forums and on the meetings, at the meetings which was conducted by forest departments, and we repeatedly talk about native plantations and the promotion of native trees. So the awareness is through our articles and our presentations only. So there is no such thing happened from our end, but there are some agencies we are doing it repeatedly, like Ecological Society or ICOS. They are doing it for various years. They are doing it,
Yes.
and the things are available readily on their websites also.
Okay.
So,
Prachi, tell them about Bijotsav. That is the most important thing.
Through Bijotsav we promote our indigenous and heirloom varieties, and through Bijotsav we also promote our indigenous tree species as well. We present our local seeds there, and we now the one question I can see which is very much related to your question as well. Dr. Sheetal Amte is asking about how many varieties we have conserved till date. So we are doing seed collection for various for some 4 years now, and we have collaboration with Social Forestry, and we have shared our seeds, native seeds, with them, and now they are growing the native seeds. We have also a small nursery in our office, and through which we are conserving some of the native and rare species. So in this way we are raising awareness. Through seed collection we call the youth, and they come up in groups and try to understand whatever there in the jungles and how to conserve it, how to identify the native plants, and in this way we are doing it.
There's another question Sonal wants to know. Can you elaborate on the status of urban water bodies in Nagpur? In the state of disrepair, what are the steps being adopted by concerned government agencies to restore the water bodies?
Well, all the water bodies in Nagpur, there are only about 10-11 water bodies in Nagpur. Not many, because Hyderabad, Bangalore, they have water bodies in hundreds, and we have only 10. And all of those were created 300 years back by the Gonds and the Bhosles, and one was created by the British about 100 years back, the Gorewada. But today we are definitely not creating any new water bodies. We are progressing, so we don't need to do that. And we are neglecting, and not just neglecting, but we are encroaching on their catchment areas, making layouts there, and the authorities, they are very active in doing all these things. So they actively do these things. So we are progressing in that manner in Nagpur.
Great. Thank you so much. Rita, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, hello, am I audible?
Yes, Rita, please go ahead.
Firstly, I would really thank all of you, Prachi ma'am, Pradeep sir, you, Sneha, everybody, for doing such an amazing job, and it's so interesting, and a lot of things I didn't know about it. So a big thank you to all of you. Yeah. So my question was, what are the native species of Nagpur? Where will I get the information? That Prachi ma'am has answered me by considering the books, right, ma'am? You told me about the book. Yeah.
Yes.
And my second question was, what are the ways of eradicating these species, the invasive species that you spoke about? apart from not planting them, because the pollination and all happens and the growth is so sporadic and rapid. So, and how many years will it take to really do this? And is there a plan which the government or the forest department is doing to eradicate the invasive species?
Uh, at least nowadays, forest department is not promoting that much invasive non-native species, but still they have some stock with them. But social forestry is yet to come up from this mindset of native non-native. They doesn't bother about it. So about eradication thing, see, what we can do is we can plant a native tree besides a non-native tree, and when once this native tree grows, we can then chop down this non-native exotic species. Or these species, as you rightly mentioned, are the growth is really very fast. So the growth, when the growth is fast, they
Take
die.
over.
Yeah, I mean, they can't survive longer years. So till the time where native species can be grown, and then naturally these invasive species, they just dies, and our native species takes their place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and some of the times you just need to chop it down. I mean, there is no other way. You can just clear the thing. Even if you can find a subabur patch, and if it is too much invasive, or a lantana patch, you just need to clear the patch. So yeah, that is one thing for particular species, not for all the species.
Okay. Now, one more question was, is guava an exotic species? Because
Yeah.
we have orchards of guava and all. So, that is a edible fruit. So, is guava a exotic species?
Yeah, guava is an exotic species. It is very much cultivated, but not from our region. But anyway, it's a fruit species and it is loved by various birds and monkeys, so we can keep it.
And it's not
Because it is
invasive
not invasive as such. If you can plant a guava tree, it can't multiply to hundreds of plants.
Right.
So one or two plants in our garden, it is very much okay.
No, so but do you recommend if people have orchards of guava? So is it okay? Because if
Yeah, if their economy is dependent on that, we cannot say, they can grow whatever they can.
because it does attract bird life, and
Yeah.
in terms of
Yeah.
ecology, it does help. So I had a doubt with it.
Mm.
Thank you so much.
Anyway, monoculture is harmful to ecology, so but we
Right.
can't deny our agriculture, horticulture,
Right.
agriculture, we can't deny that.
Right.
Right.
Thank you so
so much. Mr. Sanjay, would you like to unmute yourself and ask?
Yeah, sure. My question remains the same. We live in
Yeah.
a city, and planting trees is a little difficult for us. So, how can we contribute?
Planting tree is not at all difficult for us. Only thing is that we don't intend to do that. That is the problem. All along the roads, trees can be planted. There are number of properties where in any case we have to leave a lot of space around our buildings. So, and then there are many large institutions which leave a lot of space around the buildings. There are number of institutions along the say Nag River. So many schools are there. They can plant trees over there. So there are many possibilities. The entire city can be covered with some kind of an ecosystem.
I agree with that point, but my question still remains unanswered. That it is actually not possible for me to go out and plant a tree. But by staying in my house, is it okay if I plant a tree in a bucket full of soil? Is it okay, or how can it is not possible for me to go out, and if I have tried that, but people don't allow that.
Yeah, in that case, you can grow, at least you can grow your own food. Like in a small area, you can grow your vegetable or some medicinal things. So in that way, you can contribute, right? So there is no need to plant a bigger tree if you don't have a space, if you are space constraint.
No, and even to the first observation which he has made, supposing he develops a nursery of his own at his own house and makes small plants over there, there are other say 5th June or some other programs are there where the students go and do tree plantation programs, and the forest department does it, and so many people have to do tree plantation programs in those on those designated days, just before monsoon. So you can actually make people know, let people know that you have these saplings and you can take it away. If you let us know, we'll take it away and get it done for you.
Yeah, that is
Okay.
very much doable. Yeah.
I'm already doing that, and I have harvested a couple of crops, so I'm really happy with that. And I agree with your point, and I'll continue doing that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great. Mr. Pradeep, his question is, what constructive role NMC and Improvement Trust is playing? Are they consulting forest department and environmentalist?
Well, they are not. In fact, they are not playing any constructive role as such. In fact, if you look at their history, presently a lot of pressure is there, because so they cannot really do destructive things. But even now, as you can see, they were trying something with Bharatwan. They are trying something with Putala. They are trying something with catchment of Putala. Then they have destroyed the Pandravadi tank. They have destroyed the Sonegaon tank. They have destroyed or allowed the Lendi tank to be destroyed completely, and all the other except Gorewada, which is of course the place from which we are getting our water supply, and Ambazari, which is also another place from where we are getting our water supply. Every other tank is in danger from these authorities, and we have to save them from these authorities. That is the problem. That is the situation.
Yeah, very sad. Anjali,
Yeah,
she is asking about the nurseries from where you could source the native plants.
Yeah,
So that's a very interesting
unfortunately, there are not many nurseries which provide native species. But nowadays, forest department and social forestry, they have some native species. They can procure native saplings from Pune, the nursery which was developed by ICOS. The name of the nursery is Pranjal Nursery, which is located at Aund. We have procured native saplings from Jabalpur as well. So you have to search for native plants, or better go for your own nursery. There is a various wide scope in green jobs nowadays, so you can go for this venture.
Sure, thank you. Amit, you want to ask your question? Kindly unmute yourself.
Hello, Pradyumna sir. Hi, Prachi.
Hello, hi.
Oh, hi.
It's very saddening and disappointing to know the role of local authorities in terms of saving the ecology and biodiversity of our cities. Actually, ideally, a comprehensive environmental and ecology and landscape plan, master plan rather, needs to be created for every city, and ideally, in a democratic country like India, unless and until things have got their legal status and it is made compulsory, then only people would listen to it, and then only we can keep things in control. Like the way we have building regulations in place in terms of DCRs and bylaws. The role of the authorities has to be very, very proactive in terms of whatever landscape and ecology comes into the public realm in terms of streets, gardens, etc. And moreover, the role in terms of what bigger private developments and layouts and real estate developments, what they plan inside these developments on streets, on their open spaces, etc. And a very thoughtful list of local trees also needs to be given to them, and it needs to be made compulsory only these trees to be planted inside the large scale private developments actually.
Yeah, what you are saying
So
is
these
correct.
were some of my thoughts.
Yeah, surely. In fact, it should become part of the development plan. That's what I say, because we provide for everything which is required for humans per se, but we never consider anything in the development plan. which is useful for other forms of biodiversity. So that is an important part. But yes, the approach should be that people like us should actually come forward and put pressure on the authorities to do that. Otherwise, nothing happens. That is our experience. But when we do put pressure, some things, yes, they start happening. So we have to first of all come out openly and say things which have to be said, and then put pressure on them to do it. And it has to happen both ways. It has to happen grassroots, because grassroots is that people should first of all realize what is required, and then it comes top down, like you say, that rules and regulations have to come into play.
Very true. Shardul Sonone, I think we can take one last question. His question is, good afternoon, madam. Presentation is very useful. Can we arrange your presentation about the same topic for our group? So he hasn't mentioned which group he is from. That's why, anyway, I think he will.
Always available.
Yeah,
Right.
he's from ICLE. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We know these people, yes.
Right.
Actually, we are doing the tree survey for them. So we'll do it for them.
Amazing. Snehal Pimpre, I think what she said was planting and nurturing native species in terrace and planting them in monsoon season could help. I think this was the
Yes.
answer for some earlier question.
Yeah. Suggestion. Yeah.
Right.
Hi,
Yes,
can I speak?
of course. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so I can help with the nursery contacts in Vidarbha and MP for
Great.
procuring native plants. And we have native plants of about 88 species at Anandman, which are growing and producing seeds. So in coming years, probably we would be able to give out the seeds to all of you who want the seeds.
Great.
No. If there is a group, then I can share pictures on that.
Sure, ma'am. We'll get in touch with you.
Yeah, whatever plantation we have done and what are the results and all. Recently, the UNCCD has contacted us for a detailed report on the plantation. So I'll
Right.
be sharing that as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. One last question comes from Ketki. What kind of planting approach is needed for hills like Seminary Hills?
Prachi,
Okay.
tell them about what experience also.
Yeah. As I mentioned, the correct word at that time I was not able to recollect. So the thing is, when you go for a plantation on a hilly region, it's a very it has a very fragile ecosystem. The rainfall is high, or the wind pressure is very high. So you have to choose the species very the thoughtfully. So again, Seminary Hills is not a very high altitude thing or something like that. So you can replicate the Central Indian species over there, and you can again take care of the water flow, the soil erosion things. You should consider all these things and then go for the plantation. And the plantation should be replication of nearby jungles. The other thing which the Pradyumna has mentioned, the site was at near Bhimashankar. So the wind velocity was tremendous. The rainfall was too high. So at that place, we need to take shelter from the existing tree, or we need to introduce those species which are very much resistant to this phenomena. So once you cut down trees from such areas, it is very difficult to grow something like forest over there. So that's the thing.
Sure. Thank you so much, everybody. Yes.
प्रद्युम्न, मी प्रदीप कोकजे बोलतोय. ऍक्च्युली मला असं म्हणायचं की हे NMC नी आता मध्यंतरी प्रत्येक घरात काही लोकल झाडं लावण्याच्या दृष्टीने एनकरेज केलेलं होतं. जसं माझ्याकडे त्यांनी एक लिंबाचं झाड दिलं किंवा संत्र्याचं झाड दिलं होतं. अशा टाईपचं अशा काही ह्या चालू आहेत का सरकारकडनं किंवा प्लांटेशनचे ड्राईव्हज म्हणा किंवा लोकल आर्किटेक्चरल ची तुमची जी असोसिएशन आहे ते यांच्यावरती काही इन्सिस्ट करू शकते का अशा गोष्टी की ज्या अर्बन प्लॅनिंग किंवा याच्यासाठी आवश्यक असतील?
आर्किटेक्ट इन्स्टिट्यूट काय करेल ह्याबद्दल मला सांगणं जरा कठीण आहे, कारण सगळे आपापल्या कामात गुंतलेले आहेत. पण मला काय करायला पाहिजे असं वाटतं ते असं की आपण म्हणजे आमच्यासारख्या लोकांनी, आणि त्याच्यामध्ये आर्किटेक्ट असे वेगळे राहून चालणार नाही, सगळ्यांनी मिळून असे प्लॅन्स तयार करावे, असे प्रेझेंटेशन्स अथॉरिटीज समोर करावे, इतर लोकांसमोर करावे, एक नवीन एक मुवमेंट सारखी ती चालवावी, तर मग त्याच्यातून काहीतरी साध्य होऊ शकेल. आणि तू जे म्हटलं की बाबा ते कोणीतरी काही प्लॅन्स दिले लावायला, मला त्याच्याबद्दल फारशी माहिती नाही. म्हणजे मला हे माहित नव्हतं की असं काही करता एनएमसी म्हणून.
हा, एनएमसीने घरोघरी येऊन ते प्लॅन्स दिलेले होते. जसं माझ्याकडे मी लावलेले आहेत 2-3 झाडं, आंब्याचं झाड लावलेलं आहे, लिंबाचं झाड लावलं आहे, किंवा त्यांनी दिलं संत्र्याचं झाड पण ते लिंबूचं निघालं असो. पण ते अशा टाईपचे ड्राईव्ह ते मध्यंतरी काहीतरी घेतलेले होते. असं काही ड्राईव्ह रेग्युलरली घेतात आहे का, किंवा एन्व्हायरमेंटलिस्ट कडनं त्यांच्याकडे अशा काही सजेशन जातात आहे का?
चोर पगार जे आहेत एनएमसीचे गार्डन डिपार्टमेंट, त्यांच्यासोबत आम्ही काही पीबीआर वगैरेचे काम करतो आहोत, म्हणजे सुरू केले होते, परंतु या प्रकारचं ते काही आमच्याशी बोलले नाही आतापर्यंत.
अच्छा, ओके
ओके. थँक्यू सो
तुमचं
मच.
हे सेशन फारच इन्फॉर्मेटिव्ह आणि हे चांगलं होतं आणि आवडलं. आणि थँक्स फॉर ऑल द इन्फॉर्मेशन. इन्फॉर्मेटिव्ह पण होतं भरपूर.
थँक्यू.
We enjoyed the session.
Our pleasure. This brings us to the end of this wonderful session and end of this series that Isola Maharashtra chapter started. It was wonderful, very informative. As an organizer, I think I have learned the most. Many things. I have met such wonderful people throughout this series. Today, Pradyumna sir and Prachi ma'am have wonderfully summed up the area and the plantation. So we started from India level and literally came down to a road and what can be done around it. You know, it was the scale was huge. It was amazing to listen to two really wonderful people, and the concern about the ecology and your love for the ecology is what is very visible in the way you are speaking, and it's very contagious. I hope we spread the same concern, the same love throughout our fraternity and other people. A formal thank you to both of you for being part of this series. Prachi ma'am is the one who has literally introduced to every speaker we had. Thank you, Prachi, for all your inputs. Pradyumna sir, for both the sessions that you summed up the history and the reason why Vidarbha and Nagpur is the way it is, was something which was very unknown to many of us, and getting it to know at one session, it was wonderful. Thank you so much. Prachi, thank you so much for briefing us about a lot of forest species and varieties and what can be done at a city level. It was pleasure having you. A big thank you to our donor, Mr. Manoj Shah from Stone Studio. He has been a part of this whole process, the series. Thank you, Manoj Bhai, for facilitating the event. Thank you all the participants who have been with us throughout the series and the ones who have joined us for today's session as well. At one point, we had more than 100, so it was a packed auditorium, again, like the last one. Amazing. This is very encouraging for us as organizers as well, to keep bettering ourselves and getting new set of information to the public forum. And it's amazing doing it because of all the help and encouragement from all of you. Thank you again. And let's hope we can meet again and Isola can participate in the city and the betterment of the city in whichever way is possible. Prachi,
Thank
and
you very much.
let's be
It's our
in touch.
pleasure as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and a big thank you to Isola for taking such an initiative. It's wonderful, really.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
We enjoyed.
much to learn.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.